and we're gonna formally start. Are you ready?
Ready. I'm ready. I'm gonna look in the camera hole instead of at you.
I can't do that. I'm sorry. Everybody's gonna be like, "What the hell is she looking at?" I can't do that.
And I have to because it's like a full 6 inches. Like truly, if I look at you, it looks like this, which is like so off. So I just have to be like, okay, we're gonna do both.
Why? A man designed that. Anyway, I digress. Hi, hello, welcome to Women, Wives, and Moms podcast. I have the beautiful, talented, funny, bubbly, all around good person, Laura Sanders here. Hi, Laura. Say hey.
Hello, how are you?
Thank you for doing this podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm like just excited to talk to you. When you email me being like, do you want to talk? I'm like, yes, I like to talk to you.
I've been what you call that? I can't even think. I just got home from school and my brain is fried.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
I can't even say like I identify with that because I did not just get home from school, but my brain is fried from a much less strenuous day than that. So
it's okay. So how have you been?
I've been pretty good. I'm in I wish that my mood wasn't so dependent on what it's like outside. So I'm like feeling way better in this exact moment than I have been earlier, like last week / when it was raining and all those other things. And as I was telling you, I've been moody. So I've been like overall good, but you know, it's winter. You get the times where you're either vacillating in between total indifference or extreme anger. Cause those are the emotions that are also part of an artist. But but overall, things are good.
Yeah, we're women. We respond to the weather. We respond to the moon. We respond to the rain. All of my babies were born during a rainstorm.
Really?
That should have let me know.
You're like, hey, I know. Whenever I'm feeling extra moody, there's a beautiful thing that Dolly Parton says where she says that she like feels emotions really strongly. And she's like, but that's what allows me to write great songs is that I feel so strongly. And so it's like very nice. Yeah. Whenever I'm feeling very like extra roller coaster with my moods, I'm like, hey, this is part of what allows you to do art. So like, you still don't have to like it. You can still be annoyed by it, but it's at least like, then you get to look at it through a useful lens and not a like, this is ruining my whole life lens.
Yeah, I haven't figured that out. It's just like, leave mommy alone. I'm going to go under the covers and watch Japanese anime. Okay, go away.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about a few things that are important to you, that are important to like most women. But one of the things that I found to be really striking that you wanted to talk about that I know we as women creatives talk about, but sometimes I feel like it gets drowned out with other things is, man, pay us.
Yes. Yeah, I love talking about all creative people getting paid, but I love talking about women getting paid. Not that I'm not like a rich person that's like, learn how to be a millionaire like me at all. But I think it's been a really long journey as a creative person to like be comfortable, and I'm still not all the time, but I'm still on the journey, but like to be comfortable talking about money and asking for money and talking about specifics around money and not just like, oh, I assume they'll pay me, you know, or like, and like making sure that you're getting what you're worth. And I think it's like a constant, it's like a constant effort and education in doing that for sure.
Why do you think that's so on both sides? Like, why do you think it's so hard for people to just pay us what we're worth? And why do you think it's so hard for us to ask for what we know we're worth?
I feel like it's a big part about it is the what we know we're worth statement is like, I think it's also really hard to think that you're worth a certain, like, I think there's like a lot of self-worth and like, if you, for example, like, you're an incredibly talented comedian and that's something that like you work hard at, but also you're like naturally very funny. So like, it's hard to think like, oh, this is of a true value to someone else because you're like, well, I'm funny. It's not like, I don't need to worry about that as much. But to someone who's in an audience or someone like anything creative, I feel like it's first hard for women to like realize the thing they have is worth like a tangible amount of good. And then as far as the asking for it, I think it's just the idea that you don't want to be seen as like difficult or if it's something that you're excited about. Like I know when I first got paid for comedy at all, I was so delighted.
No.
Like I was like, oh my gosh, I get to paid to do this thing. And now it's like insane to think that I would do a skill like that for free. Like ever, unless it was like a practice thing, like an open mic. But like if now it's just such a different world where you're like, but I think it's very easy to just think like, oh, someone's doing me a favor by letting me do this thing that I'm skilled at, where in fact you are sharing a talent and a hard work with them.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword of not knowing like that you are worth a lot, and then also just being socially conditioned to be a sport, where you're like, no, I can just figure out what the pay is later.
That's something I still struggle with, but now that like the pandemic did something, I haven't quite found the tangible words for it. My hands are huge.
It's all angles. It's like when someone catches a fish and they're like, look at this fish, like right in front of the camera. I was thinking, my glasses are dirty. Like we're both as we're talking, like, oh man.
What's going on? But it's been, matter of fact, Alita texted me yesterday. She's like, you've become a hermit. Where have you been? And I'm like, I am exhausted. And so now when I leave my house, it's got to be work something. You know what I'm saying? Like it's got to be work something. So before it was just like, oh, I'm hanging out, I'm chilling, I can hang with Laura, you know, and this person, that person, and I'm away from my kids. This is awesome. Oh, $20 bucks.
Who cares if I get paid? I'm partying. Right. Yeah.
And now it's like, how much? How long?
Yeah.
What is that? Is it worth my car being carjacked for me doing it?
Well, and I think too, like a show that pays, or I've even found with design, like a client that pays well, ends up being a better show or client or experience anyway. So like when I'm really good at it, I always say like money is the handshake of quality. Where like if they are someone who has their act together enough, even I'm not saying you have to be paid like $1,000 a minute to like get to have it be worth anything. But if someone is like, hey, let me be transparent about how much you're going to get paid. I value your time as an artist. Then that's going to be a better show than one that's like, we're going to at the end sheepishly ask people to throw money in a hat. And that's going to be what your time is worth. And you're like, oh no. Yeah.
When the hat thing got to me, and then I hadn't been doing comedy that long, but one time I did a show and I got a whole $2, and I was just like, yeah, I spent more than this getting a bill. Like I did.
Yeah, you're like, I just gave the bartender more than this for sure.
And
like like just now, just in tips, not even in beverage. Like this is like, yeah. I once had a show when I was really new at comedy where I made the mistake. This was also the producer's mistake, but I had a bunch of family come and the tickets cost like $10 a piece. And I was like, hey, and I knew we were getting a cut of the door. And I was like, hey, for getting a cut of the door, does it matter if they buy them ahead of time or at the door? Which I shouldn't have to ask anyway. Like that's a bizarre thing anyway. And she was like, no, just anything counts. And then that turned out not to be true. And when I was paid for that show, I remember hearing the change in my hand. Because it was like $2.50. And I had like 10 to 15 people there that paid $10 a piece. And my dad was so funny. And he was like, geez, we could have each just paid you $1 and you could have told us a joke in the living room and you would have made more money. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, Daddy. True. Yeah.
That's true. And people that aren't feeling bad about their payment practices don't feel bad about sharing them transparently also. So it's also just like a really nice screener for red flags to be like, hey, what's the deal?
Yeah.
Like
and what's funny to me is like, it's a weird thing where I've seen guys ask straight up like, hey, how much is like, and I was like, no problem. Like, oh yeah, you're gonna get this much. But if I do it, it's like, did your uterus just speak to me?
It is. I do think
it's too loud.
Yeah, like protective of seeming like a like difficult or angry or whatever. Where like now I just try to feel very. It's just a matter of fact thing. I'm like, I'm not asking you a deep personal question. I'm asking you how much you're going to pay for a service I'm going to provide. And I feel like that's like, it would be wild. I feel like it would be wild for someone to like come do something as magical as cleaning your house. And you're like, I'm going to figure out how much to pay you once you're done. like that would just be such a wild thing.
That's just awful. Like nobody sees how awful that is.
Yes.
Question: how did you get into comedy?
I got into comedy. I was a speech team enthusiast in high school. So I did something called impromptu speaking, which is like they give you a topic and then you have 5 minutes to write a little speech, and then you give a little like 3-minute speech that you wrote kind of off the top of your head. And I loved that and like loved performing and loved every part of that. And then it was kind of a natural where I was like, well, I like talking in front of groups of people, but there's not really like outside of being in politics and public speaking, there wasn't, I needed a more like, hey, how can I go do this in bars? And how can I go like, and so I scratched that itch. I started in college in a comedy competition. And then after college, I kept going and kept doing it at like open mics and things like that. And that was all in Columbus, Ohio. So I did comedy there for a long time and then moved to New Orleans. Yeah. How did you get started?
I used to tell this joke on stage, but it's like, as I had Aubrey's my second child. And that's the one I always make fun of. Like, she's 12 pounds at birth, blah, 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 blah. But I really literally almost died. And I said to like, people always say, you're funny. And I'm like, I have trauma. And and after I was so afraid. It was like, I don't want to get on stage. I don't want to like, I'm like lame. I don't want to, this is New Orleans. You don't know what you get sometimes. Like I did a show in a bar black people, we different. We like, baby, get off the stage. You sound terrible. You stupid. Get off the stage. I didn't want nothing to happen like that. So after I had Aubrey, I was just like, well, I had a 12-pound baby. I almost died, but I didn't. So might as well try it. So
like what is there left to be afraid of?
What is there left? And so even though I was like, I had this near-death experience, I still had to go to a comedy show with my daddy. It's like, Daddy, you gotta come with me.
You need support though. I feel like you're like, hey, this is still nerve-wracking. I do love that you're like, I've been through it. I've like gone through like almost dying, and then you're like, but I am still terrified of doing jokes.
Yeah. But I am so glad that we met in that path. And I want to say this. Remember when the pandemic first started and I did the Branch Institute of Higher Learning?
I do remember that.
I still have that. I still have those. I still have them. The colors, Aubrey came up with the colors. And so
it was a great collaboration. I love those colors together. It was a pink, orange, and purple.
Pink, orange, and like green, I think.
Yeah. Pink, orange, and like a kind of like a bright green. Yes, I do remember. Because I remember when it started that I was emo enough about the pandemic, just being a person without kids, just having to be stuck at home and not doing comedy. And then I saw that like you were suddenly thrust into this, like, and now I'm homeschooling 3 young girls that I wasn't planning on doing this with right now, on top of trying to figure out work and everything else. And I was just like, oh, that seems like it deserves a gift. Like it doesn't.
I appreciate, like, I look at it sometimes. It brings me such joy because one, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing that you did, and like visually and emotionally. And two, I'm not going through that right now. So I can look at it and be like, oh, that was some bullshit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. That it's not like, this is my life still. This is a symbol of what my life is. And I feel like the Branch Institute of Higher Learning, for I guess, I don't know if your podcast listeners know that that's what you called your school at home, which I love. But I feel like calling it that and kind of labeling it that and then having like a fun little logo for it is like, how, I mean, it's a perfect example of like how you're like, I started comedy because of trauma, where you're like, oh yeah, like in times of the pandemic, even though it's been such a depressing, hard, unexpected time, you are finding those moments of like, let's just be silly. Like, let's just like, because why not? Because because we're gonna feel bad anyway. Right. So like, you might as well also be a little silly. And so I like that as a concept.
Yeah.
And it's fun to collaborate with a kid who like really is like, I want these. They're like very specific art directors.
Yeah.
Little girls can be like very like pink, green, orange, like this. It needs to be an owl. It needs to be like, and I like love that confidence and creativity.
Yeah, I have powerhouses as children. I can't verbalize how powerful they are. They frighten me, okay? They frighten me. Anyway, but you were talking about like being silly and having fun, like it was dark, you know what I'm saying, for me anyway. Yeah. It's dark time. So like, speak a little bit on that. Like, how do you do that?
Off and on. It's a good way to say. I feel like all my like advice sounding things are actually me talking directly to myself. But I feel like I've always been kind of like a silly person, and I feel like I've like always loved like jokes and doodles and like kind of joyous things like that. And I kind of like when you're a kid that you think everybody's house looks like yours. Like, I just always thought that like everybody dealt with hard things that way, or like everybody like that was their coping mechanism, and then I'm realizing that like it isn't naturally for some people. Like some people, when they get sad, they just get sad. And sometimes I do. I mean, I'm not saying I'm like a stranger to depression, that you can't just be like, but and then I just giggled. Like I get that it can be harder than that. But there's just such a like, I don't know, like it's just like a life buoy. Like I feel like when you're kind of drowning in everything else, like you need to realize that like a joyous thing isn't going to completely distract you or completely save you, but that it is like, it's still important to have that exist at the same time. Because otherwise it's like, you're going to experience the misery anyway. So you might as well also experience kind of highlights or little breaks or funny things in the meantime. I mean, I feel like some of the most poignant examples is like if you like lose a loved one, the idea that like it's much more entertaining to like shoot the shit and talk about stories that and talk about very like funny moments and like funny memories you have than just be like, this is only deeply sad. And so I feel like the pandemic was such a surreal and unexpected hardship for kind of everyone at the same time. And so it's also, when I'm feeling my best Zen self, like a really good opportunity for connection and silliness. And while I'm certainly like at a weird space with even like performing live after 2 years of it being so weird, as an illustrator, I've gotten to connect in ways I haven't with people before, like with sending you like doing a Branch Higher Learning Institute logo, or like I've started drawing coloring pages through the pandemic to just kind of like connect and spread morale. And it's, I think, and I'm realizing it's both necessary for like helping other people, but it's definitely like, I do it to help me also. And that I'm like, it's kind of like when you buy flowers for someone else, it still feels really good. Like that sort of thing where I'm like, that's kind of my buying flowers for people / myself. So I feel like, I don't know, you just gotta be, cause like, what you're like, are you gonna, I feel like actually like New Orleans taught me really well that you like can't wait for the hardship to be over to feel joy, because then otherwise you'd never feel joy.
So, no, that's just we putting on airs, baby. We've been drunk since birth. We are not lucid, okay?
Yes, like that is, but it is that feeling of like, if you were just sitting around being like, okay, I'll laugh when nothing's going wrong, or I'll like experience happiness when nothing's going wrong. It's like, ooh, well, you better not hold your breath, because like the second you feel like it's gonna be okay, like something else is gonna happen.
It kind of tethers you to that joy, even though you're not experiencing it. Like it tethers you to it. I always tell people, like, you know, when people pass away that we know, you don't want me to say words. You don't want that. Because I honestly have a hard time with hardship. And so I would take something and just be like, jokety jokes. And everybody's like, hey, God, why did you say that? I'm like, I don't know what else to give you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. But there are some people that so desperately need and want that. Like that, like they want you to be like jokety joke. And no one else is saying it and they need that. So I feel like there's, you know, different strokes for different folks as far as the grieving goes.
Just don't have a stroke. That's all. Just don't do that. Don't do that.